How exactly do monopolists maximize their profits? And surprisingly, we see the same exact condition that we saw under perfect competition. So both monopolies and perfectly competitive firms are going to maximize their profit by using the profit maximizing rule, where marginal revenue equals to marginal cost. So that same five-step pattern that we saw under perfect competition is going to be the same that we see here under monopoly as well. However, there are going to be a few things that are different, primarily with the shape of the demand curves. So here, although they share the same exact profit maximizing rule, the shape of the demand curves are going to be different, which tells us that we need to be a little bit careful about how we get profits under the monopoly case compared to the perfect competition case. So just as a review, we want to go ahead and do a quick compare and contrast of perfect competition versus the monopoly. The demand curve under perfect competition, as we've already noted, it's going to be a perfectly elastic demand curve, meaning it's a horizontal at the market price because they are price takers. The marginal revenue is exactly equal to the price, which equals to the demand curve as well. And under perfect competition, they can sell as much as they want at that market price. So just as a very, very quick review, let's go ahead and write down those three things, the three key features of a demand curve under the perfect competition market structure. So we can go ahead and compare to see how all three of these things are going to be different under the monopoly case. So here, perfect competition, very, very quick review. So here, let's use this in green. Let's say perfect competition, perfect competition. And under perfect competition, as we saw in the previous chapter, there were three things that we wanted to note about the demand curve. Number one, marginal revenue equals to price, which is also equal to the demand curve. We notice that we have a horizontal demand curve, a horizontal or perfectly elastic demand curve. Perfectly elastic, they mean the same thing for us here. Demand curve. And then finally here, we notice that the firm, every single individual firm can sell as much as it wants at that market price. So it can sell as much as it wants at the market price. As it wants at the market price. Market price. So here are three key features of perfect competition. And now we're going to see how all three of these things are going to change under the monopoly. So first of all, when you go ahead and take a look at the monopoly demand curve, what's the first thing that you're going to notice? First thing you're going to notice is, hey, we now have a downward sloping demand curve. And the marginal revenue is actually going to be below our demand curve. So no longer does marginal revenue equal demand. We notice that marginal revenue is actually going to be less than the price in this instance. So that hits two of the key features so far. We have a downward sloping demand curve with the marginal revenue curve always being below the demand curve. And because the marginal revenue is below the demand curve, we notice that it's going to be less than price. Remember that the monopoly is going to want to practice as much market power as it can, and that's going to cause prices to be higher than marginal revenue. And we notice that the marginal revenue line here is always going to be below the demand curve just because it's going to be a mathematical sort of derivation that we can do, but we'll just hold off on that. The marginal revenue curve, the slope is actually always going to be half the slope of the demand curve. So just something more informational for you guys. The third feature that we're going to see is that if the monopolist firm actually wants to sell one more unit of a particular good, it actually has to lower the price. In the perfect competition case, they could sell as much as they want at that constant market price. But here, because the monopolist is the entire demand curve, it is the entire market, it essentially has to lower the price in order for them to sell more units of the good. So these three features are going to be completely different from the perfect competition case. So let's go ahead and write all of these down as well. So first, we noted that marginal revenue is going to be less than price. And there's going to be a way that we can show this mathematically as well. But just in general, we know that the monopolist is going to want to practice as much market power as it wants. So it wants to raise the prices as high as it can. So therefore, price is greater than marginal revenue. Key feature number two, we have a downward sloping demand curve. So downward sloping demand curve. And the downward sloping demand curve with marginal revenue being below the demand curve. With the marginal revenue curve, MR curve, being below the demand curve. Being below the demand curve. So here, point number two, downward sloping demand curve with the marginal revenue curve being below the demand curve. And point number 3 under the monopoly's demand curve is the entire market demand curve. So here, monopoly's demand curve is the entire market demand. And because it is the entire market demand, in order for them to bring more quantity out into the marketplace, they're going to have to lower the price. So they must lower price in order to bring more quantity into the marketplace. In order to bring more quantity or higher quantities into the marketplace. So as you can see right here, the key 3 defining features of the monopoly are all entirely different compared to what we saw under perfect competition. And we want to hit on the first point a little bit more. So why exactly does marginal revenue have to be less than price? And we can go ahead and calculate out the marginal revenue as we go from the 10th unit of this good to the 11th unit of this good. And this is exactly going to showcase us why point number 1 is going to be true. So essentially using these numbers that we have right here, 40, 38, 10, and 11, also this 18, that's exactly how we're going to show that marginal revenue is going to be less than price. And when we just start off with the monopoly, once again, we're going to be assuming that the monopolist is charging every single person the same exact price. So if it only brings out 10 units of output, it's going to be charging everybody $40. If it sells 11 units of output, if it wants to bring one more additional piece of output into the marketplace, it's now going to charge everyone $38. So do keep that in mind. So with all of this, let's go ahead and prove point number 1 right here. So if we bring this all the way down, we want to go ahead and compare the marginal revenue with these numbers right here. So if our quantity is equal to 10, that we just noted that our price is going to equal to $40. So what is our total revenue in this case? Our total revenue, remember, is price times quantity. So $40 times 10. Our total revenue is equal to $400. If we want to bring out one more unit of this particular good, remember the monopolist has to lower the price, so therefore the price is now equal to $38. So Q equals to 11. The price is now equal to $38. And when this is true, our total revenue, how much does that equal? Price times quantity, so $38 times 11. This will give us $418. So $418 worth of total revenue when the monopolist sells 11 units of this good. However, we're going to be interested in figuring out what the marginal revenue is going to be. So remember our equation for marginal revenue. The additional revenue when we sell one more unit of a good. Marginal revenue is equal to change in total revenue divided by the change in quantity. So how much exactly did our total revenue change by when we went from 10 units to 11 units? It's just going to be the difference between our total revenue numbers that we have right here. So 418 minus 400. Divide this by the change in quantity. So what's the difference in our quantity? 10 to 11. So that's going to be 11 minus 10. The denominator is always going to be the easiest things to sort of figure out in these type of problems. So this is going to leave us with a marginal revenue equal to $18. And what do we notice about marginal revenue compared to the price of the good? We notice that, hey, when we charge $38 for this particular good, it is going to be higher than the marginal revenue. So that hits on point number 1 a little bit more with specific numbers. We always note that the marginal revenue is going to be less than price. So the additional revenue that they gain is going to be less than the price that they charge. So here, the monopolist is going to practice as much market power as it can. It has the most market power, so it wants to raise the price as high as it can. So that hits on point number 1 just a little bit more. And using these same exact specific numbers, we see it here on this slide. The monopoly's demand curve is the market demand curve, and to sell more quantity, it has to lower the price on all units, which leads its price to be higher than the marginal revenue. So 3 key features of the monopolist demand curve that we see right here. Marginal revenue is less than price. We have a downward sloping demand curve, and the monopoly's demand curve is the entire market demand curve. In essence, in order to bring more quantity, it has to lower the price. Knowing these 3 features of the monopolist demand curve and seeing exactly what the shape of the demand curve is going to take a look like, we're going to use the same 5-step pattern for maximizing profits to graphically illustrate the area for profits and any losses the monopoly may have, just as we did under perfect competition. So we'll detail all of that in the next section. I'll see you guys there.